Hello, this is David Morales, CEO and founding developer of VZ. We generally set our topics and our purpose, but if anyone's been following us, we're on YouTube now. And so we have a YouTube channel called Orientation Matters. It's actually an initiative that we've been shaping for a long time to where we want to bring the relevancy and the importance and the authority back to the orientation professional by interviewing our clients and non clients in the industry so we can share that. For us, it's very exciting and passionate, but it's a lot of hard work done by a small number of people. And our purpose, as normally is building better pathways for student and supporter success. And today, on our show, we have two special guests, and I don't know if Dennis is special anymore.
Not anymore. I don't think I'm special
Not
anymore.
He's been around, but we'll do a slight round of introductions. But Dennis, if you can start lightly, and then we'll get to you, Jen.
Sure. So I'm Dr. Dennis Wiese. I'm Assistant Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte.
And Jen?
My name is Jen Proulx, and I serve as the Events and Communication Coordinator for the University of North Dakota.
Okay, so let's put a little frame of reference why everyone's listening here. UND is one of our clients, and what's unique about them is how they handle their orientation programming. Here at VZ, not every client's the same, and our software is very adaptable, but your program, Jen, is very unique. What we have done over, I would say, the last year and a half by interviewing clients and learning more has been an approach to this last actually episode of season 2 of gaining insight. And I think one of the goals that we need to walk away from in the audience is to understand the great things that you're doing at UND. So as these new OLs, these new leaders, directors that are already there, transitioning directors, just like UConn, we had a new director come in and all those things. They bring new things to the table. But they also need to learn what other people are doing because society is changing, enrollment's changing, issues are changing. And one of the podcasts that we did behind my screen here was with Sean Ryan at CSU Chico talking about opportunity melt. But during that podcast interview, we talked about pre-advising, and I was like, I know who I need to speak to, and that's you, Jen. And that episode spawned some thinking behind the scenes with Dennis and I, and also our software development and innovation customer service of how do we tackle pre-advising for onboarding, not just orientation, and why is it important? Well, that went one step further with our last podcast with Frank Shushak and CL Bohannon from UVA and Frank, the president of Roanoke College, to where we also discussed, not just advising, but faculty and the importance of this ecosystem, really beginning at an early point of the onboarding all the way through the whole student career, like life cycle. So just before we begin, so everyone kind of knows our goal here is to interview Jen and learn a little bit more. We have some questions for you that you know about, but so people can engage with you and understand Little Your Shoes a little bit. What do you love about being an orientation professional, or what do you do at your job that really draws you to your position and waking up, when you don't want to and having to get the work done when it's crazy?
Yeah. So one of the things that I think is important to know about me is that my role has transitioned over the last couple of years. And part of that goes to what you're speaking about, David, with pre-advising. I used to serve as our on-campus orientation coordinator. And in that role, my responsibilities were very hands-on with the students and with the families. In my new role, I actually have more of an opportunity to coordinate many of the details of kind of the day-to-day class registration process. And so the work that I do it really impacts the experience that students have as they're brand new to the university. And I think that's what drives me on the day-to-day is how do I make this a positive transition or experience for an incoming student as well as their families. And so that's really what I enjoy and I have the opportunity to do in my role.
Awesome. Thank you. So a frame of reference back to the VZ land here is when you first came to us as a client and where we are today, there's a particular area of what we traditionally call the reservation process, but now the onboarding process of all the steps beforehand. There was like an advising form. And the reason I'm bringing this up, because I'm going to reference this throughout the series of questions that we have, is that there seems to be your intake form, this pre-advising form of collecting information from the student beforehand, then having a staff member like an advisor come into the system and massage the data and have this advising planning sheet. It could be multiple different names. I want you to later explain about that.
Yeah.
Why you guys did that? How is that beneficial on preparing? How is that student's experience changed because of that? And I also want to get into your lunch with advisors and all these things that you've done to do that. And then also talk about the aftermath from last year and then talk about what you're doing now into next year. So I just want to jump into the question that I have, and then Dennis and I will choose some different directions based on your responses. So my question, only because a lot of people are asking me and I couldn't answer it, what really makes your program unique as compared to traditional orientation programming?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think to help explain that, it probably helps to have a little bit of background on where we've been as compared to where we are now. And this whole transformation of our orientation program started back in 2019 when a team of us from around campus came together and really wanted to take a hard look at what we were doing for our incoming freshman students and their families. And what we found as an institution that was running what I would consider a very traditional orientation program, where families were coming to campus with their student in the summertime, they were spending an entire day on campus, sometimes more. We found that in looking at our model, students and families were leaving kind of feeling like they experienced a fire hose effect. We were giving far, far too much information to them than they could digest in a one-day program. And it was costly for our students and our families to travel to Grand Forks, where we're located. The cost of hotels and food and travel all factored into kind of this reason why we decided to transition our program to look differently. And at that point in time, we had to figure out what information should we be sharing with students and families, and when do they need it, versus trying to share everything all in one orientation day. And so in 2020, we were actually very, very fortunate to launch what we now consider our revised kind of orientation experience. And this was right as the COVID-19 pandemic was just starting. We decided to move towards a virtual registration process for our students and actually separate that class registration process from a traditional on-campus orientation. And so those two processes, in making them separate, really made things more efficient, cost-effective, more tech-friendly and modern for our students. And so what I mean by that is, in May now, we register all of our incoming students through a virtual process that involves pre-advising information that we collect in VZ. And so by separating those two processes out, our students get registered for their classes much earlier in the summer than they were before. They do it all from the comfort of their own home. They still get the support of our academic advising team, but there's not that travel to campus that's involved. And so really that's where we heavily leaned on VZ to say, what information can VZ help us collect from these students that can help us with a virtual class registration process? And then our orientation team on the other side can worry about those traditional topics when they come to campus: housing, financial aid, dining, all of those things they need to take care of, and refocus our efforts on virtual class registration. So that's, in a long story, that is what I think really makes our
that was perfect.
our program unique.
We're done.
Yes.
You answered all the questions. But thank you. That makes sense that you had a transition 2019, 2020, obviously, COVID and such, and doing that. And one of the questions that I have kind of in regards what's different and not, you kind of separated the camps from advising and then orientation. How does that communication work between the advisors and maybe orientation leaders or your staff members?
Yeah, we really had to modify our communication among campus departments during this time because having been the person that coordinated all orientation programming, on campus orientation kind of came off of my plate and was given to another department. And so we work extremely, extremely closely with our student involvement and parent programs team who now coordinate that on campus orientation program. And so we work together on all communication that goes out to students and families leading up to class registration and orientation. And our academic advising team is actually more involved in that process now than they ever were before, because we know that class registration process was part of what drove our students to participate in our on-campus orientation program. They felt like they had to come to campus and do this orientation to register for classes. So now we work very closely together to make sure that they have both experiences.
That makes sense. And Dennis, do you want to jump in with one of your questions real quick?
Yeah, so I'm really interested in the way that you kind of broke this out, and I think it makes a lot of sense in this description of the fire hose experience at orientation. I think that's universal. Any orientation professional always talks about that. So, given that you've broken these two pieces out, how's that onboarding experience really changed for your student? How's that look for them? What are you kind of hearing from your students, and that this has been broken out?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the biggest thing that we were able to do was to make, because the focus of the on-campus orientation day no longer surrounded registering for classes. When the families and the students come to campus, they really have more of a pick and choose your journey type of experience now. The day doesn't have to be as scheduled and as rigid anymore because we're not trying to fit so much into a day. And so now if a student, is not living in the residence halls, they don't need to go on a residence hall tour. If they are not using financial aid, they don't need to visit with financial aid. They can really choose their journey for their day on campus to complete whatever tasks are most relevant to them. And so that's really what that did, is freed up that day to take care of their needs versus us pushing our agenda for an on-campus orientation day.
Has your campus seen a reduction in the number of students who are attending the on-campus experience? I mean, again, as you kind of alluded to, that was, the registration was always the key driver. If you want to register, you come to orientation. That was always the carrot that went with that. Have you seen a reduction in the students attending the in-person then?
We have. I would say about 85% of our students still choose to participate in that on-campus orientation day. One of the things that is unique about us is that we have an aerospace program, and many of those students come from the coasts. And so traveling for a one-day orientation experience can be very taxing on them. And so we do still see some of those students come, but when we look at who's not attending, it's a lot of those students coming from afar.
Well, again, with any institution that has a lot of out-of-state students, that's always been, there's a financial barrier for that. So, I think it's also great that your institution's been able to break out that significant experience of registration so that those students aren't disadvantaged. And aren't, put into a financial, possibly a financially limiting situation. So that's great.
Yeah.
So kind of flipping the lens from the institution's perspective, pre-advising is a completely different ask for the advising team. What was that experience like? How did you socialize that with them? And how were you able to continue to engage with your academic advising team?
Mhm. You know, when we first, as a team, brought this up to our academic advisors that we were moving to a virtual class registration process and thinking through what was needed to make that happen, initially it was kind of a, oh my goodness, are you guys crazy to think of doing this way? Because we are an institution that was very, very hands-on and wanted one-to-one interaction with each of our students as, you know, they were planning out their classes for the first semester. And so to think through how not to lose that one-on-one experience and that ability for a student to connect with their advisor in that atmosphere, um, it wasn't met with pushback, but was met with a lot of questions about how are you going to successfully do this. And I would say now that we have a few years of doing it this way under our belt, the advising team is so 100% on board because it was a lot to ask them to be there every day of a 6-week program is what our orientation program used to be, to really making this much more efficient for them. And when I say that, I mean we use VZ in this pre-advising process to really give the advisors a holistic picture of a student's entire academic experience before they even arrive. And so our advising team really has a lot more information at their fingertips about each student they're working with than we ever had before. And that really allows them to tailor their communication and their interactions with that student, because we've gathered that information up front.
Well, it's important you say communication and tailor. When I was speaking with Sean from CSU's Chico, the concept of pre-advising also is getting early engagement, is from the
Mhm.
admissions acceptance offer until you start working with an advisor and setting the stage. Because a lot of people he would joke would choose maybe electrical engineering, but chose electric ENG. It was English or something weird like that. Something was lost in translation where that student thought they had everything they wanted, got accepted everything they wanted, then had to wait a gap period of time before they sat down, and that was not good. How early do you guys, maybe from 2019, were you doing early engagement for pre-advising as maybe compared to now and where you're going?
Yeah, that's a great question. Quite honestly, we were not doing much at all. We were waiting until that student arrived on campus the day of their orientation program to really start asking some of those questions. When they were seated one on one with their academic advisor, we were finding out the whole picture of how many college level credits are you bringing in? Have you taken any AP exams? Thinking about all of the things that might potentially impact their first semester of classes. We weren't asking those questions until they were physically there with us. By asking those questions up front, our advising team is able to do a lot of work with that student before even putting down a list of suggested classes for them.
And I think it's very important and actually amazing. You used the word connect a couple times, connecting with the advisor. And during that engagement path of connecting continually helps build that security where you have all the anxiety of like, what school am I going to go to? Because, we were talking about opportunity melt in that one. And we also discussed with, Frank and CL about the faculty factor of, students need to meet faculty when they come to orientation or when they get introduced to this ecosystem, and also with the advisors. I think setting that stage is good. If you can explain a little bit about how the advisor communicates,
Mhm.
um, are there still one-to-one virtual sessions? Do they send individualized texts? What type of relationship are they building? Do you have a call campaign? Are they making physical calls?
Yeah. So it's pretty multi-layered, is what I would say. Our students start kind of filling out that pre-advising information in late January for us. And we found that that timeline works well. That the sooner we're in touch with those students, the more likely we have been to retain that student. and hopefully even reduce that summer melt as we continue to be in contact with them. So starting in January, we're collecting that information from students, the pre-advising information. Our advisors are actually reaching out probably on a bi-weekly basis, and they all have cell phones. That's one of the changes our academic advising team made, so they're able to actually text with students. We found that sometimes they're more likely to respond to us through text than a phone call or an email. We're in contact with them about math placement exams, if we're needing that information prior to registering for classes. We're in contact with them about reminding them to complete housing information, room selection, dining selection. Our team kind of takes a holistic approach to helping the student in their transition. So while, yes, they're academic advisors, they also serve kind of as that resource to all areas on campus.
I was about to
Um,
say that too because, that's it's Sean. I had to pick at him a little bit. He's like, "I didn't know whether to call them advisors, orientation leaders, or they're just helping,"
right.
and they're guides, basically, and I like how you said that. That makes a lot of sense. I'm gonna direct to Dennis because I know he's probably got a couple questions.
Yeah, and you kind of started this with this that connection leading to retention and reduction in melt. Have you, as your campus, measured that, and have you seen a marked difference in that?
So I am sure that there are individuals on our campus that
Yeah,
have that data. I don't know if they've ever been able to directly connect that back to the
right,
change in our orientation programming or communication
right.
plan, but I do know that, while many institutions right now are seeing a reduction in their number of students, our population is still growing.
Oh, wow.
And so I like to think that we're part of some of that success, certainly not all of it.
No, I mean, and I think you're absolutely right. I mean, if you look at the literature, if you look at, David's referred to other campuses and that early connection experience. I mean, I think that's one of the things that's differentiating those innovative campuses when they're looking at leveraging new technology tools or leveraging feature sets within BZ is they're trying to find those opportunities to connect with students and their supporters to make sure that that identity building between the institution and the individual is happening. And, you talk about those biweekly connections. There's always this ongoing, you're a part of this institution, you're a part of this campus, and we also know, once students start registering for courses and they start completing forms, and those are fantastic indicators. I'm sure your enrollment management people are also, have new data points that are great for trying to predict what their incoming class looks like. So again, there's a lot of great data that are coming out of this, but I think also from a student support perspective, it's probably a much more engaging experience. They probably feel much more welcome when they arrive and much more comfortable when they arrive in the fall or the spring semester than in the past, where it was kind of like like I said, here's a fire hose. Now we're not going to talk to you for 2 months, and then we'll talk to you again, right? It's like this ongoing onboarding, which is, I think, a fantastic model. I think that's wonderful.
And
Yeah,
I wanna
absolutely.
interject real quick. I'm gonna be name dropping here a little bit. But part of what I do as Orientation Matters is represent and advocate for orientation professionals all the way up. So, Jesus at Cal State LA, Sydney at University of South Florida, both CIOs, and President Shushak from Roanoke College. I had to ask them, why is it so important? But I had to flip it around to tell them why it was important. It's kind of like what Dennis said, is like, there's an immense amount of data in the beginning here. And if you put your interest, like you said, campus partners that you're working with and people even from career services, and that's what I was looking down the resume list on LinkedIn, and the value of this customer service cycle of, the life cycle, everything you can imagine starts if you get the information correctly and start sharing it with other departments. And Dennis hit on class sizes as being one of them. What
Mhm.
we're looking at in the future, and this is where we're kind of looking at the crystal ball part of the conversation here, because I think if anybody wants to find more about your program, and Jen, if you don't mind, people listening, you can find you on the posting of this, reach
Yes.
out to you to get some more details about your program. But I think they're more interested also in hearing the future and not just what you
Mhm.
had done. We're looking at persistence rate. So obviously orientation onboarding, hence onboarding is the beginning, but you get into the sophomore slump, you get into junior year, you get into senior year, and then you get into offboarding. So what we're trying to do is look at a trend across the cycle, the importance of the beginning piece, but how advising seems to be something that can be continued throughout the student life cycle. And I just wanted to get maybe philosophical approach or maybe what your program's doing at UND about how you're addressing those different years other than the incoming class year, those next years.
Yeah, that is a fantastic question. I One of the things that I can tell you that is taking place now is that we are in the process of building a team that works with students who maybe came in as an electrical engineering major and decided not for me, and they need to think through a new path. So we right now have a team of 4 academic advisors who also do career exploration with our students. And so this is one of the ways that we are using the data we're getting from Viese to kind of identify who those students are. Within the Viese system, we can tell which students change their major right off the bat and what's the discrepancy between their original choice and their new choice and major. And so we actually do outreach to those students. Within a week of them changing their major in the system, we're connecting with them saying, how can our academic and career exploration team assist you so that you don't, spend more time at UND than is needed? How can we help guide you in your career or major direction? So that's one of the major things that I think that we're doing to try and help them through the lifespan at UND.
That is a great answer. Dennis, I'll jump to you real quick, but we're going to do that Insight Summit. We're doing a post one in September. I'd like you to talk maybe and do a short clip on this concept. This is such a great thing. I think we could do an hour and a half on this. Sorry to interrupt you, Dennis.
No.
Go ahead with your question before we have to round out to the last one.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of it's a question, but it's an observation. I mean, it's the understanding that VZ is more than just click the box to register for a program.
Yes.
By looking at change of major, you're getting insight into student behavior, student mindset, and then are able to be responsive. And so I think, it's a great example for other campuses as well of, what are students doing within the VZ system? Especially if they're using Path, or they're using any of those advanced task list features, what are the students doing or not doing? And then how do you've built an entire response protocol around that. And I think that, that in of itself is just an amazing example of thinking outside the box of this is not just, this registration system. It is really an insight into, what's kind of going on in this student's head. And so I think that's wonderful. And I appreciate your team doing that. I didn't know if, have you seen, what's kind of been the student response to that? I mean, do you have any insight into that? Are they like, oh my gosh, this is perfect. I have all these questions. And thank you for contacting me.
So I'm sure you won't be surprised when I say that it's mixed. It's a mixed response. Some students, you get radio silence and no response back. Others, yes, the responses, they're very grateful for someone to have reached out to them to have those conversations, especially in the context of us doing virtual academic advising. I mean, that is somewhat of a foreign concept. And so the fact that we're doing kind of this upfront work to guide a student in the right direction, I think they're very appreciative of that opportunity to talk with somebody when we recognize that a change has been made in the system.
Cool. So Dennis, this is your last chance to ask a question. Anything that's burning right now, burning desire?
I have like another hour's worth of questions, but
I know, me too.
I'll just limit to what I've
Okay, so generally what we do at this time is to give you a little moment to share what you want to share to the audience. And we traditionally call this the one thing, and I'll do the 3, 2, silence. But I really want you to take this moment to speak out. I want to thank you first and foremost for joining us today. There's a lot more work, a lot more insight to share. And shameless plug, I like to be on campus and do a video podcast with some of your staff members, some of your advisors, and show for real how this works.
Love to have you.
I've never been to North Dakota, but I can wear my Atari or Nintendo shirt, and I'm sure I can make some friends.
So summertime is the time to do it, David. You don't want to come here now.
Yeah. I completely respect that. So with that being said, I'm going to give you the floor. And thank you very much, Jen. And also thank you very much, Dennis. 3, 2.
So I think the very last thing that I would want to say about moving our campus to a pre-advising experience is really that change is hard. I recognize that on every campus, within every business, change is hard. Taking little steps to make changes to your programs the way that we have over the past 3 years has made an extraordinary impact on the student experience on our campus. When we talk about retention, when we talk about admission numbers, I really think that the changes that we made have really filtered back into seeing those positive outcomes in those areas. Wiese has been a tremendous partner to us in helping us customize what we feel like was needed in our system to make this program run successfully.